During the time that Fauvism was beginning, imperialism was starting to take off and World War I was taking place. Fauvism began in the late 1890s, but its most significant works came around in the early 1900s through 1908. New technologies and scientific discoveries such as radioactivity, X-rays, the camera and bicycle were starting to change the way that people lived and perceived the world. Fauvism, much like these new inventions in society, was a completely new style of art that took people by surprise. There were a lot of factors that went into creating Fauvism and the styles that the Fauve artists took on while the movement lasted. In the first pieces of the movement, the contrast to traditional art was huge, which is a factor that led to a lot of criticism. The artists Henri Matisse, André Derain, and Maurice Vlaminck pioneered Fauvism and its distinctive style. Their main influences were artists such as Paul Signac, who was a neo-impressionist painter. The Fauve style was less science-based. They focused on the expressive potential of color, not an object's natural appearance. From the influences of neo-impressionism, Matisse developed a lot of spatial styles and techniques that helped guide him into Fauvism. The Fauves were often compared to German expressionists because their focus was mainly being emotionally involved in their subjects, unlike traditional French artists where the formal aspects of pictorial organization were the biggest concern. The creation of these new styles first came from Matisse, who started studying values and variations of light and textures, along with color and form. He broke away from traditional art styles while learning more from Fauvism, but those styles still stuck with him throughout his life as an artist. Another huge influence of Fauvism was Africa and the other non-Western cultures. The inspiration that the Fauves got from Africa was African art. The African art was mainly a reflection of the primitivism in Africa. Primitivism is the idea that without the influences of the European civilization corrupting them, non-Western people would be or were more in tune with the primal elements of nature. Even though Picasso was not a Fauve artist, he and Matisse were key figures in the spread of interest in African-influenced modernism. Matisse frequently visited museums and likely encountered African sculptures at the Trocadero Museum with fellow painter Vlaminck. Although the interest in African art sparked at the end of the Fauvist movement, Matisse used his Fauve styles to move on to new works. This is one example of why Fauvism was considered a transitional and learning art movement. Another influence of Fauvism, probably one of the most important events that took place during the movement, was when Matisse took a trip to Saint-Tropez. He went with neo-impressionist style artists Paul Signac and Henri Edmond Cross in the summer of 1904. While he was there, he painted one of his most famous works, Le Calme et Volupté, which in English means luxury, calm, and pressure. In this painting, he used divisionist technique, which is pretty neo-impressionist based. He got that influence mostly from Signac, who guided him towards that style of art. This trip really inspired Matisse to learn new styles and build off of the neo-impressionist style. It was basically a stepping stone in the creation of Fauvism. A year after Matisse left Saint-Tropez, he came back with Derain to really start to develop the Fauvist style. Derain had met Matisse at school in Paris in the late 1890s, but he did not meet Vlaminck until 1900 in a town called Château in Paris. The two met on a train and hit it off from the start. Eventually, all three artists lived and worked in Château together, and their collaborations made history. Vlaminck painted Man with the Pipe in 1900 and Interior of a Kitchen in 1904. Both were very important to the development of his style. Derain painted the bridge at Le Pic, and Vlaminck again painted a piece called Gardens in Château. These two paintings are examples of similarities in their works, which is what happened when they used each other as inspiration and helped each other out. However, even though they had similarities in their styles, there were also really big differences. Derain and Vlaminck painted portraits of each other in 1905, and they both look really different from one another. The colors used to contrast each other and the compositions are different also. Vlaminck's portrait of Derain fills the frame and has more texture. There's a little similarity between the brushstrokes, and that's one thing that ties them together. A lot of artistic development came out of the artist being at Château, and although it wasn't necessarily the birthplace of Fauvism, it was definitely the start of something new. Matisse also attended the Académie Julian, where he encountered great leaders and artists who taught him a lot and who he was able to teach. Some artists who influenced him were Moreau, Des Vallières, Rouault, Evenepoel, and Piat. He was able to influence other artists like Flandrin, Camoin, Manguin, Marquette, and Linoret.
Fauvism was the first revolutionary art movement of the 20th century. It is the movement of color. What do I mean by that? The main goal of the Fauvist piece was to show color. Fauvism developed from pointillism and impressionism. Pointillism consists of painting dots with each dot having a weaker complement dot. Impressionism used light to reflect bright colors to cause shimmer. Fauvism incorporated the strong dots from pointillism, ditching the complements and the bright colors and importance of light from Impressionism. With inspiration from pointillism and Impressionism, some Fauves also took ideas from Divisionism. Divisionism is very similar to pointillism, but uses more dashed marks instead of using dots. Along with the influence from those art movements, Fauves also used very bold and distinctive brushstrokes when painting their paintings. Fauvism comes from having a spontaneous reaction to color. The color and expression of the color was the most important part of the piece. The Fauves really wanted to show off vibrant and bright colors in their paintings. The style, composition, and how they painted the piece was much less important. This made the color one of the most unifying components of the Fauvist group. The color was meant to show emotion or mood. The artists often painted their pieces in unnatural colors because of this. They were painting to show how they felt. Fauvism was more than just bright in-your-face color. It was also about the luminosity of the colors. Luminosity had to do with the shadows and light in the colors of the paintings. Gauguin once said, "Play of light and shadows by no means produce an equivalent of any natural." He was talking about how the Fauvists really tried to manipulate the luminosity in colors, even though it was never as good as the real thing. Fauvism was similar to German Expressionism with all of the colors, but Fauvism used brighter and bolder colors. But some Fauves did end up moving to Germany, and their pieces became more and more like the German Expressionists. As I said, a very important part of the movement was individual expressionism. Each artist would try to show their emotions and reactions in their own specific way as much as possible. This idea was very well said by Matisse. Fauvism is the art of arranging in a decorative manner the various elements of a painter's disposal for expressions and feelings. The subjects in the paintings were not very important, unlike Impressionist pieces. Fauvists would paint things like bridges or houses and really just focus on bringing their emotions out through color. They would paint things like pink trees or yellow grass. Each element in the piece would have a specific role. The pink in the lake would have meaning. The orange in the grass would display a certain emotion from the artist. Inspiration for their subjects also came from many northwestern cultures. These were cultures such as Africa. The inspiration came from their art pieces such as sculptures. This was called primitivism. Another important part of a Fauvist piece was the first impression of the piece. They wanted the first impression of the piece to be collected, strong, and to look very put together. The Fauves wanted their pieces to be very comforting to the viewer. They wanted people to see their pieces and feel calm and serene. Because of this, the Fauves avoided using cruel images in their works and only focus on the bright side. Their subjects would never include wars, death, or anything similar to that would put people down. balance of composition was another key idea in Fauvism. Since the Fauves used such bright, saturated colors, this caused people to look at the flatness of the canvas. There was very little dimension or depth in their paintings. You couldn't really tell the background from the foreground. It was all about making their pieces look very, very flat. As I said, Fauvism really wanted to put the focus on the flatness of the canvas that the painting was on. They did this by using bright and heavily saturated colors for their pieces. Matisse made the color structure. The color structure was painting large, flat areas of color on the piece. This technique helped convey overall emotions and moods of a painting. Some artists, such as Vlaminck, focused greatly on the saturation of color. Vlaminck would express this color by putting the tube of paint directly onto the canvas and start painting. This made the color in the painting as pure as it possibly could be. Matisse mainly worked outdoors. This helped him capture and take in the nature and landscape around him. It also gave him a better emotional reaction to nature since he was immersed in it. Working outdoors also had the effect of strong natural light which helped him paint. Fauvists used very bright and unnatural paint when painting their paintings. In their pieces, they did a lot of highlighting and contouring of their subjects. At one point, the majority of the Fauvists used white lines to do this, and the others used black lines. To make their colors as bright as possible, they would use the color wheel to help this. Now let's compare a neo-impressionist piece to a Fauvist piece. The first painting is the Olive Orchard, painted in 1889 by Vincent van Gogh. It's a neo-impressionist painting. The spatial qualities of the painting are very significant. There's a foreground, a middle ground, and a background that are all pretty distinctive. The colors of the painting are really natural and muted. The trees are green, the grass is a lighter green, and the sky is blue. The trees look like actual trees, and they're outlined in black. There's short brush strokes that shows a fluid movement throughout the whole frame. You can see that especially in the grass and the trees. The second painting is Mountains at Collioure, painted in 1905 by André Derain. This painting is clearly a Fauvist painting, and the spatial features are a lot different than Van Gogh's piece. There's no distinctive foreground, background, or middle ground. They all just kind of blend together with the grass, the trees, the mountains, and the sky. You can't really tell anything apart distinctively. The colors are not natural, and the trees don't look realistic, and all the colors are just to show the painter's emotions. The mountains are orange, and the sky is just a whole bunch of colors, so this really shows how the colors are not natural. The painting was also done with divisionalist techniques, and nothing is outlined in black. So the grass and the leaves especially use the divisionist techniques with the little dashes and then kind of dots everywhere. And nothing is outlined in black as well, which shows just less dimension and no depth. Even though the pieces are very different when you first look at them, if you further analyze them, there are some similarities. The brushstrokes do look similar to Van Gogh's piece, and that shows that there was some inspiration from Neo-Impressionism, just how the brushstrokes flow and are not so like harsh or strict. The shapes are also similar in the trees. As you can see, the trees here look very similar to the trees here, so that shows some similarities. In this video, I'm painting a painting inspired by The Trees by Andre Derain in 1906. To start, I'm painting the sky, and I'm doing this with yellow to show emotions of happiness, and it's also a very bright color, and the sky isn't naturally yellow. And I'm doing divisionist dashes for the brushstrokes, and they're also very short, but they are bold, so this shows a really saturated color. Now I'm painting some mountains, and I use the color purple because purple is not a natural color for mountains. And I'm also doing the very short brushstrokes again, but not really divisionist, just short strokes. And also the sky blends in with the mountains, so there's no really depth of field. Next, I decided to paint the trunks of the trees, and I painted them pink because I've never seen a pink tree before. And I am using short strokes, and this shows how there's not really much detail. It's more just like painting quickly. And I am doing it boldly though, so I go over the spots many times to make sure they're very saturated and bright. And then the trees also go into the mountains, not really showing much depth. Then I decided to paint the leaves, and the leaves I did them with a bright blue color because that's very unnatural. And for the leaves I did the pointillist technique, so I just painted little dots all over the branches and into the mountains kind of. And I did them very scattered and not realistic. Those don't look like actual leaves, they're just dots, but you can see how it kind of would look like it. One aspect that I really took inspiration from the original painting was the ground, because Derain painted the ground orange and I thought that that looked nice, so I painted the ground orange as well because it's very bright, and I think that the mix with the blue it looked like more like Fauvism. And I did very spaced out brush strokes with some white space in the back, and the strokes are very divisionist, like very long dashes. Then I wanted to make the piece more interesting, and a lot of Faubus pieces have like random colored dots all over. Like in the sailboat painting by Derain, this lake has pink and blue dots. So I tried that out. So I used a light bright green, and I just did dots in the sky, and then I moved to the ground just to add more interesting parts. So it's not so plain and just one color. Then I wanted to go back to the trees and the leaves, so I used a lighter blue and painted more dots and dashes like pointillism and divisionism. And I painted them because I think that they added like more interesting factor to the painting. And I also think it made it just look prettier and more like leaves. In this next video, it's a recreation of the Clown Tragique by Georges Rouault, and his style was a lot more expressionist, but still Fauvist, but he had a lot more of that in his paintings. So we used lighter colors when doing this to make it more Fauvist. So we're starting with the background, and the background is a light green, and he's using short brush strokes to really show the Fauvist technique and also making sure that it's a very saturated background still. The next part that he painted was the shirt or the body part of the clown, and this is a portrait, so it kind of cuts off like right above the chest area. And he used purple for this because purple is very bright and it shows a lot of emotions, and the strokes again are very light and um, short, but they still show saturation. So still working on the shirt or the body part, he was adding black lines and like strokes and kind of outlining the shirt, just adding more color to it, like dark color, because Rualt does a lot of outlining with black and making everything look darker. And we wanted to make the painting look a little bit more like the actual painting, so not just be all bright. So we did add this to make it more similar and more like Rualt's style. So next he started to paint the collar of the clown. And for the collar we used a light blue. The original painting had white, but we wanted to make more color, so we did light blue. And in this, the short brush strokes really helped make the collar look more like an actual collar, because if you were to do long ones, it would just more look like a big circle of white or blue on the picture. But the short brush strokes really added more texture into the piece, which is another one of Rualt's identifiers. Next, he painted the head and the hat of the clown, and we started with a purple color, and then we thought it was too bright and too much just for this painting, like comparing it to the other one. Even though Fauvism usually is really bright, we just wanted to make it more like Rualt, so we added white to it, and mixing the colors really made it more how the other painting looked. And he used short strokes of the colors mixed together, and this kind of added a more textured look to the painting. And for the hat part of the painting, he just made it go out a little bit on the sides to make it look like a hat, but the hat and the head are pretty much the same color. Then he was started to outline the whole painting. So Rual did a lot of outlining in black, and so he started with the head, and then he drew the facial features. So there's the lips, and then the nose and the eyes, and then outlined the eyebrows and the hat, and then later the shirt and everything, and the collar. And this was something that Walt really did a lot, and it was towards more expression. Then he added light green colors in the corners of the background because Fauvism did a lot of mixing of different colors. Then the last part was the bow tie, which was already kind of outlined in black, but he just added the light green again and then some orange to add more brightness and more saturated colors to the piece.
The shock of the new. Henri Matisse had a rough life early on. In the beginning, he lived throughout the worst wars, the great slaughters, demented rivals, and he lived through some of the most traumatic political events recorded in history. His only reference to a political event is found one time in a painting. He painted pictures of comfort, refuge, and balance. In his paintings, there were no conflicts, no discomfort, and no historical events. He refutes the notion that the great discoveries of modernism were made by violently rejecting the past. In the end, Matisse grew a passion for painting the human figure. He painted nudes and had models to really study the body. He led a small group of men, known as the Fauvists, to study nudes and to work together. Relating him to Picasso, he was less relentless and had a more ironic approach to his paintings. This is a portrait that he painted of his wife, and as you can tell by the portrait, the skin is unnaturally colored as well as there is no definition and unrealistic lines. As you see the green stripe on her face, it also represents the title of the painting called Green Stripe. As you can tell from the background, there is no depth nor definition. There is deepened lines and highlights to the portrait. In this portrait, you can tell there is highlights as well. There's darkened lines in some of the areas, but it's still a flat portrait with no depth. The picture has unrealistic figures in the front as well as the tree on the side, and the dots were directly painted onto the canvas. The dots were taken from pointillism.
Around 1900, you toned down your color palette for a little while. Why?
Well, around that time, I think I wanted to focus more on the masses and the volumes that were in my painting. So I just experimented with the muted colors so I could give myself more room to work on the volumes and masses.
In 1905, you painted The Open Window. In this painting, you pretty much abolished any distinction between foreground and background. What was your inspiration for this?
The open window, well, that was a really long time ago, so I think that I was combining the styles of Seurat and Gauguin because, I really liked both of their works. They're really good artists who I admire and worked with.
For the most part, all of the Fauve artists had similar techniques, but there were some differences. For example, Vlaming's style was to use more of a dabbing technique when he painted, and Derain mainly worked with the flat areas of color. Why do you think you all had separate styles?
Well, we were a pretty loose-knit group of artists, all the Fauves, and Fauvism doesn't really have any strict rules, so I think that's the biggest reason why we all had differences in our works. And it was also a learning movement, so it was transitional. I think we all used our own styles and built off of it, and I think that's part of the reason why Fauvism was such a big influence to other movements like Cubism, because it just had a wide range of ideas and styles.
Although you were the leader of the Fauve movement, a lot of people agree that you didn't always have the Fauve style on your mind. Sometimes your styles seem to lean more towards the calmness and clarity of the French tradition. Is this true to you?
Are you accusing me of being a fake Fauve? I've heard that and I just don't understand it.
No, we were just seeing about why you were drifting.
No, I guess traditional French art will always be a part of me because it was a style that I used and built off of. Because when I build off of art styles that I encounter, I don't just abandon them. They're always going to be a part of me because you learn from them. So, yeah.
Seen as a co-founder of Fauvism, Derain worked close with Matisse. In the beginning, Derain's pieces had lots of patterns, consistency, and structure. That soon changed when he leaned towards a more saturated canvas and a greater use of intense colors. Derain continued to work with hues, then finally found his style. After finding his style, he created some of the most advanced Fauvist pieces using light and colors. Derain used a very head-on view and had a different style from the others, giving him more freedom. Derain's pieces were more decorative, and towards the end, his style became more advanced, accomplished, and abstract. To emerge from Fauvism, he used anti-naturalistic colors to create patterns that flickered across the canvas, denying distractions between foreground and background. With a Van Gogh-like style, interested in hue and small applications of pigments, he soon settled with abstract use of color and pattern. With brushstrokes, Derain was one of the most favored due to his use of color, composition, and patterns. In this picture, you can tell that the boats are darkly outlined as well as has highlights in the water. The water is pink, which is one of the unrealistic traits that the Fauvists use, as well as a green sky. In this picture, there is no depth, and it's painted with dots, and you can tell there's movement in the picture as well. The movement was created by adding the dots to the picture. In this picture, you can tell that it was also painted with dots to create movement as well. The lake is white, which is one of the unrealistic traits to it. As you can also tell, the background and the foreground are matted closely together so you cannot tell the difference. There's highlights and lowlights as well as darker areas and unrealistic parts to the picture. In the background, they added random colored dots to add more balance. Maurice Flammec was a French painter considered one of the principal figures. He united with the others for the use of his intense colors. Flammec went on to pressing the colors from the tube directly to the canvas, making the colors as pure as possible. Growing up poor, he took many jobs, adding to his fast pace and accelerated visions and ideas to add to the structure of Fauvism. In this painting, it's painted with a small selective colors to add to comfort to the painting, as well as has less depth and no background or foreground. The painting is outlined in a darkened black, as well as if you see in the corner there's an unrealistically shaped person adding to one of the ways they painted. In this picture, you can tell the trees are unrealistically colored with the color pink, as well as the foreground and background have no distinctive areas in there. Also, you can tell that there is little depth to the picture, but there are darkened and highlighted areas to it. You can also tell that the picture is balanced by the blues on both ends of the painting. Georges Rouault associated with Fauvism and Expressionism. His style early on was more academic, and his paintings interrupted social and moral criticism. He mostly painted clowns and prostitutes, but his subject matter was religious. He painted more with watercolors until World War I. After that, he painted with oil paper, blues, lighting, and scribbled. During World War I and World War II, he devoted much time to engravings. He also stayed a religious painter throughout all his stages of art. He gave out a series of paintings called The Passion of Christ. As I said before, Rouault liked to paint clowns, but in this clown, you can tell his Fauvist painting by it having unrealistic lines and an unrealistic face with a darkened outside as well as highlighted inside. It also shows the lack of background that the Fauvists use when painting their paintings. This was a painting from his Passion of Christ, and as I said before, he did have the religious aspect all throughout his artist history. This also shows how far he was from the other Fauvists by painting a picture religiously. As you can tell in the painting, there is darkened areas as well as highlighted areas like other Fauvists, and there is a little bit more depth to this picture from the different pictures that we've showed you. The face is also unrealistically shaped and uneven. Fauvism was a transitional learning stage for most artists. Other important Fauvists were Charles Kaman, Henry Charles, and Georges Braque.
Hi, can you introduce yourself?
I'm Duffy, a Fauvist painter.
How do you feel about your popularity in the Fauvist group?
Well, I know I'm not as influential or as popular as Matisse, but I do have some pretty good pieces.
When did you join the Fauvist group?
I was a little bit later than most, around 1905, because that's when I really started to make a lot of paintings like Fauvism.
What was the big goal of your paintings?
I really wanted them to look like no dimensions or flat or have no depth.
What subjects did you like to paint most?
Architectural, like cities or buildings and houses.
How are you different from other Fauvs?
I'm different from other Fauvs because I don't use pointillism as much, and I don't use as bright as colors, and make them more realistic.
Well, what did you like to do with color?
Well, I liked contrasting red and blue, but make them more subtle.
Did you only do Fauvism, or can we find your works in other genres?
Well, no, it wasn't just Fauvism. I branched out a lot more. It's just one period in my life.
Fauvism was criticized at first. Many people believed that Fauvism was a threat to the standards of decorum and decency. Camille Mucklar called Fauvism a pot of colors flung into the face of the public, showing Fauvism was one of the first uses of bright and unnatural color, which was immediately rejected by the public due to its unnaturality. Fauves got their name when Fauvist paintings were put with a traditional sculpture, and Louis Bexel saw a sculpture of a child's torso and a woman's bust with all the colorful Fauvist pieces and said, "Look, Donnelly's in the cage of wild beasts," giving the name of wild beasts. Fauvism was hated but soon accepted due to its happiness and comfort.
What do you think about Fauvism?
This is a pot of color flung in the face of the public. What are all these colors? Trees are not red. This is a threat to the art standards of decorum and decency. This is so gaudy. It utterly disgusts me.
Is that all?
I could go all day and all night about how bad this is.
What do you think about Fauvism?
You know, it's really started to grow on me. The bright colors are a very nice change. Now, the colors make me feel happy. After my husband died in the war, these paintings really started to make me feel happier. And there's no sign of violence or war in these paintings. They're just so comforting and nice. I'm starting to see why it's becoming so popular. I really hope this movement and style of art lasts.
For the majority of Fauve artists, Fauvism was nothing more than the transitional learning stage between Post-Impressionism and Expressionism. By the time 1908 rolled around, artists seemed to start to have more of an interest in Paul Cézanne's ideas of the order and structure of nature. This drove them away from the emotionalism in Fauvism and led them to the logic and structure in Cubism. A painter named Georges Braque, who came around near the end of Fauvism, became the co-founder of Cubism along with Picasso. However, even though Braque and Picasso started Cubism, it was Matisse and Derain who cleared the way for it. Many of the Fauve artists moved on to developing their styles into neoclassicism and neorealism as well. Derain was one artist who got into neoclassicism style paintings. African art combined with the techniques of Fauvism also were popular into the mid-20th century. Matisse and Dufy were the two artists who seemed to get the most out of Fauvism and really understand its effect on painting. In 1908, Matisse wrote Notes of a Painter, where he talked about the new role assigned to color in the art world after Fauvism ended.
What do you think of Fauvism?
Well, I really am starting to like the artists who follow the ideas of the order and structure of nature. Have you ever heard of Cubism? It's really nice. I really like the structure in that art style. I'm not really into all of that sappy emotional stuff anymore.
Any last thoughts?
Well, I'm kind of over Fauvism.